Hi everyone, welcome along to our session today. I am joined by the awesome Jackie Malloy, and I'm going to be honest, I'm very excited about this one. I'm very excited to get her views on some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. We had a prepping conversation yesterday, Jackie, didn't we? And we basically just filled it with the conversation we're going to have today, and I quite enjoyed it. So I suspect we'll have an entirely different conversation today, but
No doubt.
it'll still be enjoyable and full of lots of insight. So welcome along to the session, everyone. We're delighted to have you. As it kind of says on the front here, if you are here to talk about the 5 myths holding your culture change back, you're in the right place. If you thought we were going to talk about something else, then maybe you want to go on an adventure, but stay with us. It's going to be interesting. We'd love to have you. Just to kind of introduce us, I'm Paula Brockwell. I'm the founder of the Employee Experience Project. Bona fide culture nerd, I would say, a bit obsessed with it. I don't know if you'd agree, Jackie, having worked
I
with me in
would,
the
I
past and
would.
things. To be fair, I would say my greatest skill is turning anything that happens in life into some sort of cultural observation. Everything's linked to culture in my life, but that's probably tiresome for those who spend a lot of time with me, but I quite enjoy it. And this is Jackie Malloy, who's joining me, an HRD extraordinaire, currently working at Homes England, but having worked across a range of awesome organisations in lots of very different, I would say, in your career, I think, has been really varied in terms of the type and tone of organisations that you've
Yeah.
worked with and the type of challenges that you faced. So I'm really excited to get your perspective on some of what we're going to talk about today. The intention for the session today is to host a conversation really about what I grandly title the 5 myths of culture change. I think there's a lot out there, but really what I wanted to do was, rather than have me kind of grumbling on about the things that irritate me in practice day in, day out, really, I'll be honest, I absolutely loved working with Jackie when we worked together. I think she's an exceptional HRD. I think her ability to understand the context that she's operating within and really connect the HR agenda to what the business needs is just exceptional. And so when she agreed to kind of have this conversation with me, I just thought, what a treat for those of you who are watching today. So the intention is not to have me talking for ages about the things that make me grumpy about culture change. It's really to kind of share those 5 myths with you, but then ask Jackie her experience of dealing with those and what she's learned throughout her career that's allowed her to manage those things, either overcome them herself or help others take the journey on that to make sure that the work that she's doing in the organisations that she's worked with has really brought maximum impact on things. So what I thought I would do is just kind of introduce the session in terms of what those 5 myths are so that you know what they are, and then we're going to take them each in turn and talk through them. Jackie, I've been kind of broadly just saying you're great. Is there anything that you'd like to do to introduce yourself? What would you like to say to people before we get started?
You're great too, Paula.
Thank you.
I think the only thing is, when with such a build up, I don't want as an expert in this field. I'm just here to share some of my observations and experiences. Hopefully, a couple of them will resonate. But really looking forward to chatting today.
Sounds great. Lovely. Okay. Well, bear with me. Let me talk a little bit about what those 5 core myths are. Let's demystify it a little bit with you in terms of what we're going to focus on today. And then we're just going to get into the conversation if that feels okay for everybody. So 5 core things that, so my day job is supporting organizations in 2 ways. One is about helping them build absolute clarity around what type of culture is it that we need around here, what is it that's stopping us have that culture really, and how do we kind of prime the conditions that allow that culture to flourish. So that piece around clarity understanding is important. I think the other thing that we do at the Employee Experience Project is really about building capability in teams, so in the HR team for sure, but also working with broader leadership teams to really build that confidence and clarity to not treat culture as this thing that we do on the side of our day job, but help them to really mainstream it. And I think in doing that work, constantly I hear myself grumbling that culture has a PR problem. I think it's really widely misunderstood, not by everybody really. What we get taught in the CIPD, what I got trained on through my occupational psychology training, very much kind of breaks it down into this sentiment driven thing that is about making people happy, about getting an engagement score, and the way that we talk about it and we think about it by default, I think, puts it on the edge of how a business does business. It's the nice to have stuff that we do once the business has finished doing its business day in, day out. But truthfully, that's one of the biggest things that's holding it back, because we all know that it isn't that. It is that, but it's much more than that. It is about the rhythms, the ways of working, the way that our people show up day in, day out. So it's about the way that our business does business. So it's tangibly related to business results. But I certainly, time and time again, going into new organizations, I'm like, right, okay, so we're starting with this place of it's a nice to have, it's something that we add and we need to drive through. And I'm often working with HR leaders who are hugely, hugely frustrated because they know what the value is, but they're stuck in a place where everyone is kind of treating it as this fluffy thing that sits on the side. And so I guess what we started to think about in our business, well, what are the barriers that we're trying to break down, the myths that we're trying to break really quickly, and we're trying to help HR teams and leaders break really quickly to help mainstream this thing and get everyone involved in it. And so there's 5 that we've really identified seem to really influence and constrict people. I would say the first one is happiness being our core goal. And that doesn't mean that I think that we shouldn't make people happy. Don't get me wrong. Of course, it'd be nice to have a happy, healthy, motivated workforce. And that's a critical part of any effective culture. But I would say that truly great cultures, high performance cultures, sustainable productivity is the goal. So getting people to a place where they actually understand their role, feel enabled by their role, and they're having lots of positive emotions. But that is as much about feeling supported, rewarded, encouraged to do a great job as it is about people remember to honour National Chocolate Day and let us do a bit around it. That piece around this being a good place to work and a place that supports me to do good work makes culture much more mainstream immediately. I think one of the other things that we see in the second one that we're going to talk about is that our people know everything, that they hold all the answers. And again, there's a subtlety to this. Of course, our people know a huge amount of the answers, but there is nuance in that. They don't know all the answers. They don't necessarily know where the business is going or what it needs in order to succeed or what some of the broader market challenges may be. So purely building our culture action plans and our culture goals and priorities out of staff consultation is shaky and tricky, I would say. And we'll talk a bit about that in a while. I think we also see this obsession with people looking to describe culture. So a lot of the work that happens, and a lot of the work that I do, in all honesty, is taking other people's cultural audits, which tell you perfectly about what is going on, but they don't necessarily talk about why that is happening. So it is important that we can describe our culture, but the big question we should be asking in culture change isn't what is our culture? It's really, why is our culture what it is? And understanding those root causes, those drivers, what's happening in our system is really critical. So, if you're doing that piece of work yourself, or if you're using a provider for that, I always say, make sure that piece of work is answering the second question. Why is that happening? If our people don't trust leaders, why don't they trust them? What is the standard that they're holding leaders to that gets them to that place, rather than just, oh, they don't trust leaders, so we've got to do some stuff to get them to trust leaders? Because sometimes it's not actually about what the leaders are doing, it's about what our expectation of what they should be doing is, and perhaps that's a bit outmoded or out of date for our business is growing, so our CEO can't know everybody by name anymore, or whatever it may be. So yes, we've got to describe it, but we've also got to seek to understand what's driving it. Another thing that we see, particularly when you get into the activation stages, is the 4th myth, which is that real focus on skills and mindset. If we can just comms the right stuff to people, get them to understand why we need to do this and why this is important, and we can train them with the right skills, then that will allow the change to happen. A bit, if we build it, they will come. If we give them what we need, that's important. And again, it is a critical part, but it's not the whole answer. I think we get fixated on doing that piece. And in doing that, what we risk doing is ticking the box of having done some stuff. But what we're setting our people up to be superheroes in perhaps a system that's set up for our old culture. So that piece around people capability and understanding is critical, but environmental readiness, priming, and the ability of our systems, our processes, the reactions of other people around us to encourage and support and enable that shift in behaviour is just important. So yes, we've got to do the training, but we've got to think about the environment that we're plopping people back into, and is that actually encouraging some new stuff? And I'm excited to get your views on that, Jackie. We had a really good conversation about that last night, didn't we? And then the last thing I would say, the fifth myth that we see is this default that we get to, that our leaders need to role model and sponsor. So that it's critical. They do. All of these things do need to happen, but they're not the whole picture. I would very much say that what I see often is that definition of what sponsorship is, that definition of what role modeling is often really minimal. We've got to a place where we don't ask a huge amount, particularly from our executive leaders when we're driving culture. We ask them to sign off the action plan that we're driving. We ask them to do that one team development session where they put some commitments together that we never hold them accountable to, or ask them to hold themselves accountable to. And we don't necessarily do the work that we need to get them to really think about the shadow that they're casting. And some of that is about the example that they're setting, but the other piece of that is massively about the environment that they're creating. So how do we ensure that they are giving people space to flourish, to allow those new behaviours to come through, how they're creating the conditions that people show up as we need them to, rather than, because they're busy and not necessarily thinking about that piece, they're thinking about those big priorities that they're getting pushed on by investors or the board or regulators or whatever it may be. Are they stepping back and really considering the mode that they need to take in order to encourage other people to shift their behaviour too? So these 5 elements together, I think we make little micro decisions and assumptions about how we should do things, which I think ultimately limit the power of the work that we're doing. Whether we don't get the right insight in terms of, we don't have the right goal, we don't have the right insight in terms of what we're trying to change. We're just trying to reduce the symptoms without really knowing what the root causes are. So just sending us this continual loop of trying to solve things at a surface level, or we're not necessarily priming or getting the right help from the system to allow new behaviour to flourish. I think we create this situation where we as HR leaders are really trying to hold the whole culture system together in a situation where actually a lot of stuff isn't primed for this thing to work the way that we need it to. So I'm going to get off my soapbox on that, shall I? Because I could talk about that all day. And Jackie, I'm going to invite you into the conversation and see what your view is on that. Now, we haven't prepped this, but I've just got a bit excited and talked for longer than I said I was going to. So I'm sorry about that. But I guess I'm interested if you've got any like higher level observations or reactions to what I've just said there. You know, what's your thoughts when you see what's going on in businesses, or you've seen what's gone on in businesses across your career? What do you see those things playing out, or what are the challenges that you see around culture change? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I think it probably resonates with everyone on the call as well. I think the biggest takeaway for me, which was really a bit of a light bulb moment after working with you, Paula, frankly, is that shift of mindset as a HR practitioner, that actually this isn't about engagement as the driver. It's about creating the conditions in which people can thrive.
Yeah.
And what sort of clicked with me is, if we do that, we're effective as businesses. So tick, and people are motivated by that and sometimes rewarded materially for that. But there's a byproduct on engagement as well, because surprise, surprise, you get that mastery, purpose, autonomy, tick, and your engagement goes up as well. And I'm quite embarrassed that it took so long for that penny to drop for me, but I will never lose that now. So that is now how I think of culture.
Yeah.
So it, at that top level, create the right conditions for people to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I bet that there's a lot of people who are watching this who will kind of reflect on that with you, because I think we're set up to believe that engagement is the most important thing, and of course it's important. It's a really critical indicator, isn't it? But if that's our single goal, we're narrowing our focus, aren't we, to a point of this piece around sentiment. But I also think, in your defense of your own kind of self observation there, it's what we're told is the most important thing, isn't it? It's what we're told in our training. It's what our CEO asks us to improve. And often, I think, as HR leaders, particularly in businesses where perhaps the human focus, the operational focus and the operational goals is much stronger than the human element, it's a really lovely, tangible thing for us to hold on to try and bring the humanity back into the room. I guess the call is, yes, focus on that and see it as important, but don't see it as the single part of the goal. Yeah, I hear you. Cool. Well, shall we talk a bit more about that element of happiness as the goal? I'd be interested to get your reflections on where you've seen culture work getting pulled towards that place of keeping people happy rather than focus on creating those conditions, and kind of what you do and what you have done through your career to try and have those conversations to broaden things or increase the scope of things. So what does that look like for you? What's the journey that you've taken on that piece around making the goals more than happiness when you're doing culture work?
I think sometimes it's about looking beneath the surface. So if it's okay, Paula, I'll use like an illustrative example, really low level one, but it was one that really gets my cogs whirring when we're talking about stuff like this. So in a workplace, I think we've probably all experienced this, one of those horrendous multiple emails and everyone's sort of snarking at each other or being passive aggressive or etc. over something like a template or a pro forma. And so the problem is evidently the pro forma's no good. My recommendation would be, let's strip that back, because it's probably not about the pro forma, actually. The pro forma is the symptom, not the cause. And each example will have different drivers. But some sort of common ones might be, one of the recipients is like, why do you think I need a pro forma? Don't you trust me? Do you think I'm terrible at my job?
Yeah.
The owner of the pro forma, why are you questioning me? Do you think I'm terrible at my job? And so on and so forth. So it's all, I think my overarching answer would be sort of dig, because it's rarely about what you see on the surface. And the reason I use such a low level illustration is you can apply the same to your engagement scores. What's it really about?
Yeah.
Is it about balance of power? Is it about the fact we've disabled people from doing their job really well?
Yeah.
Is it about the fact they don't feel trusted, they don't feel regarded, they don't feel that their professional expertise is considered by others? So that would be my overarching point. Dig beneath the surface.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such a lovely example, because it typifies to me how pragmatic our goal setting can be as well. So, different organizations need, what everybody needs as a default is nobody being snarky on that email chain and everybody trying to resolve the situation. So there's some default good culture stuff that definitely kicks about. But in terms of what other goals we might have around how our culture plays out in that context, I don't know, for example, in really highly regulated safety first environments, we might want people to just accept that pro forma because culturally we need a place where people are willing to be regulated and directed and controlled around things. If we're working in a really innovative environment where we need people to be taking advantage of the market in order to drive our sales, we need people to be going, why is there even a pro forma in the first place, or no one, for that to never exist. And I think when we start to set our culture goals more on how do we need people to show up and how do we need them to work day in, day out, and what needs to feel like the norm, it makes it a much easier conversation. When we're working at that real surface level of happiness, we just want people to be less snarky when it comes to the pro forma. And that, as you say, that might not be what the problem is at all. It might be there should have never been one in the first place, or, you know, there's somebody who's coming in who's trying to control others by process rather than conversation or whatever it may be, which isn't fit for purpose. I'd be interested to hear your experience around, you know, it's cool, isn't it, when the penny drops for you and you can see it, it's great. But I think what I certainly see is great people like you doing that bit in businesses where you're educating the business and you have a really great conversation and they get it and they can see it's not about engagement, but then 3 weeks later you have a conversation with the exec again or whoever and somebody says, how's the engagement score? And you're like, wait a minute, you know, the myths are really well ingrained and people slide back. What is it that you've done in the past that keeps that conversation about performance and thriving relevant to try and get it to embed in a useful way?
I mean, no magic bullet. These things are deeply ingrained would be the first thing I'd say. So expect that slide. And you might also do this work with a group of people and then that group of people change. Yeah. So you're back again. So I don't think there's a single panacea or a perfect solution, but keep on banging that drum, keep on reminding people fundamentally this is about making it easy for people to succeed. Like, who doesn't want that? That's not HR and fluffy. That hits your bottom line, it hits your stakeholders. If we succeed, we all succeed. So if we, you know, create those conditions. I rarely use the word culture anymore, quite deliberately. Colleagues around me do, but I try not to, because I try and keep that mantra of, you know, let's make it easy for people to succeed. In terms of practical, do you want me to talk a bit about how I work with some of our leaders? So I have to say, I've some phenomenal colleagues who do some brilliant work alongside me. So this is not reflective work that I've done in isolation. I'd be keen to stress. But some of the things we've done, you know, the general sort of tooling, using appreciative inquiry more to aid that digging. You know, what might good look like? Tell us about a time when it felt really easy to succeed, be that here or somewhere else, to sort of unpack conversations. But in really practical terms, working with the leadership team, sort of contract collaboratively with them. So what do I mean by that? So you could have a situation where you've got, you know, a set of values. I think most organisations have. I've worked in a couple of organisations where we've got beautiful sort of frameworks linked to these, which tell us how we should behave, and you know they're great. They're really great anchor, but they potentially can sit on an intranet or on a wall, and they're not really brought to life. So having that dialogue, human dialogue with leaders, talking through examples of, you know, when did something not go so well? When did it go brilliantly? Tell us about it. And then unpicking what cultural characteristics drove that. And one of the best examples I think I've got where we've really done that golden thread piece was out of those conversations, creating a set of standards which a group of leaders will all hold themselves and one another to account on. And then building out some capabilities, because people are all different personality types. And, you know, for some people, they need an anchor. They need tell me what I need to do and I'll tick it. Others don't need that, but actually having that framework of, okay, got some standards, got some capabilities, doing some assessment against those, some self-reflection, maybe 360 feedback or the like, and then delivering interventions to plug the gaps. That might be training, but as you said earlier, Paula, that's not the be all and end all, is it? And people leave the room, go back to the day job. So it it's about reminding ourselves constantly as leaders, we signed up to this, and it having that link back to the optimal culture that you do want to build.
Yeah, and I suppose having been part of some of that process with you in the past, I think two things that I see you do really well. One is that link to why is this important from an operational point of view, so getting people to connect to the how is this going to change my day in day out life, because it's going to shift how people show up or how they act. I think you do that really beautifully and continue to do that. And the other thing I think that I see you do really, really well is you get the leaders to do the work. So it's not just talking about it, you do that piece to get the alignment, but then and you've done the training and development, but there's also this piece around, well, how do we get the leaders to work on doing this? So that difference between thinking about it versus acting on it, I think, is one that you play out really nicely. So you're giving people a role, you're giving them clarity about how they can be different, and then you kind of support them, you create the conditions to support them to be different, which helps the change build some momentum for sure.
Yeah, certainly hope so.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about the next myth then. Our people know what needs fixing. So again, I'm just really interested in your reflections of where you've seen, that big chunk of employee feedback, colleague feedback, accidentally taking people on an adventure that we figure out it wasn't necessarily the adventure that needed to be taken or the solution that needed to be implemented after all.
Yeah, and I think it links back to the earlier part of the conversation in terms of try and do a bit of digging if you can. So again, this is not new to people, but on the back of our engagement surveys, we sort of listening sessions, and they're done in teams. They're not hosted by HR, they're not facilitated by HR. They're done in the business with the business. And sort of creating a sort of champion network as well to enable some of this stuff to happen. But the purpose of that is not just to say, yes, you're unhappy about that, we'll fix it for you. It's about being honest. So we can't change that. Or we don't want to change that. That's what businesses are so fearful of doing. So actually, that is not going to change.
Yeah.
So we appreciate that you're not happy with that particular aspect, but it's not going to change.
Yeah.
For one reason or another. But working out a way with people, and I can't emphasize that enough. In those parameters, what might work, what might shift the dial for them. And sometimes it is about accepting that something that really does grate on you, you have to make a choice as an individual. Can I tolerate this or not?
Yeah.
But I think for most people, where they're frustrated that something they feel needs fixing hasn't happened, they're either genuinely right, and then our role is to help them unlock success there and make the change that's required, or they're hoping for something that isn't there. In the environments I've worked in, if I hope to have table tennis tables and a grass slide to get to my desk, it would never have connected with the sort of social purpose type environments I've worked in. And now I'm perhaps too old for a slide, but it's things like that. It could be a bit utopian in the context in which people are operating. So we need to support them to get to that point themselves, and then hopefully the decision will be, okay, I recognise that, I'll put that one to bed and I'll focus on how I create great conditions here to enable me to succeed here.
Yeah, totally. I think I really kind of love that reflection around, encouraging that deep dive, because I think one of the things that I see free people so much is that realization that when somebody gives me a view that isn't necessarily fact, that's their opinion, and that's flavored by those two things that you've reflected beautifully there. What they expect good looks, what's happening, but they filter that through what they expect good looks like. And if their filter doesn't quite fit with what is reasonable for or possible for the business context, you're going to spend your life just trying to meet expectations that just aren't ones that you can meet. So often the biggest and most powerful bit of culture work that you can do is having really honest conversations about expectations and what we can really offer here and what it means to work here, so that you can calibrate those expectations so that then your colleague feedback becomes much more well calibrated and beneficial, I guess, in terms of really driving your decision making. But I think that's one of the biggest things I would encourage people to do, is think, when I get feedback, remember that isn't fact. That is just that person's view of the world, and we need to filter and consider that doesn't mean just discounting it. Of course it doesn't. It means if we continually getting feedback that we feel is a bit uncalibrated, we do that work around resetting the deal, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about this idea of if we can describe culture, we can change it. Then myth 3. So I'd be interested to see where you've seen this myth play out, that whether it's from a good point of view, can we describe exactly where we need to get to and then people will go to it, or from a problem solving point of view, if we, as soon as we learn that we're a clan culture or a meritocracy or whatever it is, then we'll know how to change ourselves to the other one if that's what we want to be. Talk to me a bit about how this idea of description and observation has helped or hindered you in your career.
I mean, my first probably port of call would be those sessions I described with the senior leaders. I think I can't think of a context where bringing something to life and connecting it back to the business you're working in fails. to be honest. So I think, I've got multiple examples running through my mind of various pieces of culture work over the years and the very different environments in which they were. So, I mean, some stuff I remember doing something many years ago, where we got everybody in the room to write what culture meant to them on a block of wood, and we built like a giant Jenga tower, so those kind of, and it was a laugh because obviously it all collapsed, and probably wouldn't be permissible in many environments. So I'm not talking sort of real deep academic stuff here, because that's not what this is about. Bringing it to life is, what does it feel like for you? How are you doing? Are you okay? Do you feel good about being at work today? Are you achieving? Are your team feeling supported? Are they feeling connected, communicated to? It's one of the hardest things, particularly in very layered organisations. That's one of the hardest challenges, I think, for leaders. So when I've done this work, I've often known the challenges, Paula. So you do sort of, whether it's facilitate or manipulate, there's a fine line, I think, but I might ask the questions of those leaders that are based in me actually knowing what the issues are. Hoping that will provoke insight on their part. Totally. And then the solutions will flow from that.
And there's a really interesting piece there, isn't there, around that kind of, how do we shift the conversation from a list of 47 behaviours that are sitting on a lovely intranet to what are the couple of things that you can do to just make this better, and then notice where it is and then do a couple of other things to move it forward. We often kind of, when we're driving larger transformation programs, we're thinking about what's the essence of what we're trying to do here, and so often it boils down to improving the feel and flow of work. If you're helping your managers to move the conversation of, I just want people to be happier, to a place of, can we think about how we really drive the flow on this, then that pragmatic conversation about what do we actually need to change. It turns. I always use the analogy. I think about my mum standing at her kitchen window when we were kids, and us shouting up from the driveway, going, "We're bored. What can we do next?" And it didn't matter what she ever suggested to us. She could never have made us unbored. She had to kind of ignore us until we went and find some ridiculous adventure that she would never have been able to suggest. And I think there is quite a bit of culture work that sits like that. We cannot turn other people's frowns upside down. So getting them curious about what's creating the dissatisfaction, or curious about what's creating the friction, then we can help them to move through it more pragmatically, I think. So yeah, that moving it from the ether of how do we all unite and align around these big words that don't feel real in the day to day, into how do we want it to feel and flow, and how do we work on that, and how do we've got to make sure that feel and flow aligns to the overall organization, else we're causing a whole other set of challenges. But how do we do that? That's the key.
We have, and I think if we think about ourselves as humans, we're all different, but for me, I don't think I've ever got better at something by somebody telling me I'm terrible at it.
Yeah.
I've got better at something by seeing an opportunity to grow.
Yeah.
Or seeing someone else do something, and I'm like, oh, I wish I was them. I wish I could do what they've just done. And then working out how I might get a little way towards that goal.
Yeah.
And that, I think, if we sort of loop it back to the happiness first, that's not entirely within the control of any individual leader. So it's almost like you're setting yourself up to fail as a leader if that's your only benchmark as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Because so many factors influence that sort of on the day, how do people feel in the moment?
Yeah.
You know, whereas if we think more broadly and think, okay, I need to find a way to unlock that penny drop moment in the individual. Because nobody thinks they don't tick the boxes on frameworks regarding behaviours.
No.
Nobody says, yeah, I'm pretty terrible. Yeah. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't. That's the trick. Whereas if we can get people to think, well, actually, that person seems to be getting different results to me and they're doing it this way, I think that can be a really healthy way, an unthreatening way of unlocking the positives in this space.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll agree with me. Like I see a lot of noise coming about it's the line managers, it's there, a lot of research saying, if someone doesn't leave an organization, they leave a manager. We put a huge amount of pressure onto our manager and our leadership populations to be the one who can solve when somebody's bored in the summer holidays. And actually, while they do have an influence, a lot of the leaders and managers that we work with feel knackered and trapped because they feel like they've tried everything, and they're kind of caught in a system that is demanding them to be a certain way and asking their teams to be a certain way, and they've got teams pushing up saying, but I need this from you, and they're caught in the middle. And I think that human conversation around how do we all play our part, how do we do the organizational stuff that we need to, and how do you play your part in that, but also get your team to play their part, so you're not being mum or dad and trying to turn everybody's frowns upside down. That feels really important. And I guess that links to myth 4, so I'll take us there, which is this bit around it not just being about individual skills and training and mindset. Not, I suppose for me, the watch out there is us not just putting all of the expectations on our leaders and managers to shift everything. We've got to give them a role and responsibility, but great culture change doesn't send someone out to be a superhero to push against the tide of what the organization is set up to do. So I'd be interested to talk to you about that, where you've seen people being asked to change, but the system around them is set up for them to be the old version of themselves or the old version of behavior. So they're kind of set up to fail right from the start. Have you seen that? What have you learned from that, or trying to influence that?
I wish I could say no, never, but I think we'd all know. We'd all know that simply isn't true, and perhaps the better answer would be like yes, repeatedly throughout my career, the same as everyone else, no doubt. And this was something we did chat through yesterday, wasn't it? And The one which, again, I like a simple illustrative example, collaboration. We love that word, don't we? We love the word collaboration. I use it probably far too frequently as well. But actually, if we don't create the space for collaboration, it won't really happen. Collaboration isn't, do you agree with me, Paula?
Yeah.
And if you agree, we've collaborated.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
I think, a lot of the time what we think it is, and we ourselves think that because it's easier than actually properly collaborating. And in terms of conditions, I think particularly since the pandemic, across many, many businesses, we have this like busyness obsession, possibly a justification, a presenteeism thing, I don't know. But you are not justifying your existence if you are not in multiple meetings and responding to Teams and responding to emails within sort of an SLA that nobody would sign up to commercially.
Yes.
Whereas, real collaboration, are you and I in the same headspace to connect on this issue? First of all, we're not going to collaborate if my mindset is on something that I've dropped the ball on or I'm worried about. So, are we in the same headspace? Have we got the time to collaborate properly? And then sit down and truly work through and think about the thoughts of people who might not see the world through our eyes as well. So in terms of those conditions, it's yes, you can have inhibiting systems, old-fashioned systems, you can have all of that, you can have awkward stakeholders, tricky customers, all of that kind of stuff. I think most things boil down to fundamentally having the time and the space to consider. Solutions are within us all. We know this. How many people have a light bulb moment when they go to a conference? How many people come away from a conference with a notebook full of great ideas to take back to the workplace that they haven't had the time, the headspace to consider whilst they're actually doing the job?
Yeah.
So for me, though, that would be the biggest driver. There's lots of other stuff, there's all the stuff we talked about, enabling, being trusted, being given autonomy, but time and space and the right headspace, I think most people will resolve most issues, actually.
Yeah. And again, this is something, as we work together, I saw you working on really systematically, that element around opportunity to work together from that time and space point of view, but also from an operating system, operating model point of view. Are we setting everything up in silos versus creating the connections? Are we expecting people to just go out and find people and build relationships? Are we creating the forums and opportunities for people to connect? These are questions that we can start to ask ourselves in terms of, if we know that there's a particular behavior that we want to flourish, asking what are the conditions that allows that to flourish, and making sure that we're action planning on creating those conditions, not just giving people the skills to demonstrate that behavior, feels massive for sure. Okay. And then last area to talk to you about, myth number 5, the role of a leader defaulting to this piece around they've signed off they've signed off the action plan. I'm not hitting a bugbear for myself here. I can feel the agitation building. Or we've rolled them out and they've used the script that we asked them to on the launch session or whatever it may be. What is expecting more, and in creating the conditions for our leaders to be more than that, to make sure that they're really, because they set the tone, don't they? They create the ways of working and the operating rhythm within any business. So how do we get them to play that role rather than play the role of, they're going to do this over here and I'll say it's a good idea, but we're going to run the business in this way over here? How do you shift that? Or what is that what advice, I guess, would you give to other HR leaders who are looking to shift that, really? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, and I would caveat, if I'd actually solved this entirely, I would write a book. It's an ongoing battle, isn't it, for anyone. because fundamentally, whilst we're rewarded as individuals, we will act as individuals. So I think the start point is often creating that sense of leadership in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, we're in this together. We've got the same vision. And that takes it back to this isn't the HR project, guys.
Yeah.
This is an operational delivery project that will enable us to succeed as a business.
Yeah.
So finding that hook right at the beginning of these journeys that people can connect into starts to build that mutuality.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because nobody is a panacea. Nobody is perfect. Leaders have bad days too. Leaders get things wrong. And if they don't feel safe to be able to admit that, they'll retrench. And that creates an even worse situation. So mutuality, safe space to fail, be vulnerable. It's such a cliche that feedback's a gift because it often doesn't feel like a gift in the moment. Not a gift you really wanted to unwrap, but it really is. It really is. So, you know, trying to support leaders to see that, again, all it's going to do is help to get them nearer to their personal goal, which also happens to be locked in as part of the group goal as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And you know, again, that's something I've seen you do really nicely in practice. I think there, you know, things like setting up cross-functional project groups, kind of getting overall, you know, if you have to do culture in a program, getting cross-functional oversight, getting ops leaders involved in that, and it not being an HR project that's farming activity out, you know, that piece around getting people to feel safe and able, but also giving them the opportunity to act, I think is really critical. So I suppose 2 final questions to end. I guess the first one for me is, what's the biggest shift that you've seen in yourself in terms of how you approach culture change work now compared to how you approached it early in your career? What's the kind of greatest lesson or gift that you've given yourself in terms of that action? Let's talk about that first. What's your thoughts? It's a big change.
I think it's recognizing, because despite working in different sectors, my profession has been the people profession for 25 plus years. Recognizing that not everybody speaks my language or sees the world the same way as I do. Therefore, talking in the way you and I might be really comfortable chatting away about culture isn't always the way to land the enablers of change into the business.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm not saying I've done this, I'm not saying I've ticked this entirely, but at least I'm self-aware on it. Focus on being a leader, not a rescuer, and encourage colleagues to do the same.
Beautiful. I think that's a beautiful takeaway for people. Yeah. How do we activate the change, not be the change ourselves, for sure. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah. And I guess I'd love to just kind of, as a closing observation from you, I'd love to hear an example of where you've experienced something that's felt fantastic culturally, you know, something that you want to celebrate from your own career that feels like a time when a leader's helped create a culture that was really right for you. So talk to me about something lovely that's happened in your career.
So I could talk about, you know, when we got best companies, when we did, you know, all these different things which are probably on my CV. But I won't. I'll talk about something that's much lower level, actually. I worked for someone many, many years ago, and we stayed in touch. And probably 15 years after we'd stopped working together, we were walking along a beach in Wales. And I said to him, weren't we ahead of the game on that project that we succeeded on? I said, I'm really proud of that. So it remains one of my really proud career moments. And he turned to me and he went, yeah, he said, it was a terrible idea. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, oh gosh, he said, I thought it was the worst idea I'd ever heard. And I was like, well, why did you let me do it then? And he said, because I trusted you. He said, and I saw your passion, and I thought, let's let her have a go. And that for me was everything, because that workplace I still hold very, very fond, in very high regard now.
Yeah.
And you move on because your career propels you to. But actually, that kind of leadership, to me, that really is setting the cultural tone.
Yeah.
Truly. Thinking something is terrible, but allowing it to happen anyway.
Yeah.
And, creating that environment where someone's safe to fail. That's just wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah. And so what happened in that experience? Who was proved right? Was it a terrible idea or was it a good idea?
I mean,
we need the reveal.
It was actually massively groundbreaking. It was something called, we called it community cafes, and it was bringing in, so I worked in social housing then, Paula, and it was bringing in a whole cross section of the community to talk about their lived experiences. And you might be thinking, well, that's not new, but it was 25 years ago.
Yeah, I get it.
So and not restricted. So this was before the Equality Act, but we had visitors who we were privileged enough to work with from all of the 9 characteristics that you'd see in the Equality Act, and more so, social mobility, etc. And enabling our colleagues to really understand that supported us working with our communities so much better.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's long gone now, but it was recognised by the then Audit Commission as well. So it ticked all sorts of boxes, CV wise, if you like, for the organisation and potentially for me at the time. But more fundamentally, it was a success because it meant that we served our customers better. It's as simple as that, isn't it?
Yeah, and a beautiful indication of that kind of cultural strength of not necessarily seeing it yourself, but trusting that your people have different experience, different lens, and maybe see something that you don't. It sounds amazing. Amazing.
Yes, well, listen, it was good.
Thank you so much. What a conversation. The last 50 minutes has flown by. I so appreciate your insight. As you know, obsessed. I'm a major fan of you and what you are doing in the world. So I really appreciate you just kind of so generously sharing your experience with everyone. Thanks everybody for listening. Absolutely connect with Jackie on LinkedIn. I'm sure she'd be happy to have a chat if you wish to do so. See him as well. If you aren't connected with me, come and find me. I'm always chatting about all of this stuff on LinkedIn, probably more than anybody ever wants to hear, but it's part of the adventure. But thank you so much for today, Jackie. Thanks for coming. And have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.